Good afternoon. Today we will see remaining portion of diuretic drugs. Objectives of today's classes: potassium sparing diuretics, in which there are two subclasses, aldosterone antagonist and sodium channel blockers. Osmotic diuretics, carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. So these three classes of diuretics were remaining. Among this we will see mechanism of action, indications, dose, side effects, drug interactions, and current clinical status of these three classes of diuretics, and some salient features of diuretics as a class. So yesterday we have seen classification of diuretics. We will again revisit this classification for remaining drugs. In case of potassium sparing diuretics, we have got aldosterone antagonists, that is spironolactone, canrenon and aprenon. These are the drugs which are inhibiting the action of aldosterone by antagonizing the aldosterone receptors or mineralocorticoid receptors. Then there are directly acting potassium sparing diuretics. Basically there are inhibitors of epithelial sodium channels. These are triamterene and amiloride. These are the two directly acting potassium sparing diuretics. Then we have got carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, that is acetazolamide, brinzolamide and dorzolamide. And osmotic diuretics. In case of osmotic diuretics, we have got mannitol, glycerin, urea and isosorbide. We have seen this figure yesterday also, right? We have seen that loop diuretic act as this ascending loop of Henle. We have seen that at a distal convoluted tubule, thiazide diuretics acts. In case of this potassium sparing diuretics act as this collecting tubule, thereby it produces diuresis, and you can see that most of the reabsorption takes place before this portion. So potassium sparing diuretics are lower efficacy diuretics in comparison to loop diuretic and thiazide diuretic. In case of mannitol, that is osmotic diuretic act here, and this here acetazolamide will act. In case of potassium sparing diuretic, there are two subclasses. These both are sparing potassium, that's why they are included in one group. Otherwise their mechanism of action is different from each other. Spironolactone, canrenon and aprenon. These are the three drugs which are acting as aldosterone antagonists by inhibiting MR receptors, while there are directly acting drugs which are acting by inhibition of epithelial sodium channel, that is triamterene and amiloride. In case of spironolactone, if we consider spironolactone as a prototype drug of aldosterone antagonist, then it acts on cortical segment of distal tubules. Basically it's a competitive antagonist of aldosterone receptor for mineralocorticoid receptors, and thereby it inhibits ATP and thereby it inhibits sodium reabsorption. And because of this inhibition of sodium reabsorption occurring at cortical segment of distal tubule, percentage wise natriuresis only 3% NaCl occur. So it is a very mild celluretic diuretic. Apart from natriuresis, it also causes potassium retention, and thereby it is producing potassium sparing effect. In case of thiazide diuretic and loop diuretic, apart from sodium ions, there is also removal of potassium ions along with fluids. While in case of spironolactone, here potassium is spared. So in comparison to the thiazide diuretic or furosemide diuretic, there was hypokalemia as a side effect. While in case of spironolactone, as potassium ions are conserved, there is production of hyperkalemia. If we see mechanism of action of this spironolactone, this figure shows diagrammatic representation of distal tubule. So here this mineralocorticoid aldosterone binds with these mineralocorticoid receptors, and thereby it produces certain changes in nucleus, and thereby there is synthesis of mRNA. This mRNA will produce changes in AIP, and ultimately there is production of ATP, and thereby there is entry of sodium ion and exclusion of potassium ion. But this process is blocked because spironolactone bind with mineralocorticoid receptor, and thereby it do not allow formation of this mineralocorticoid receptor and aldosterone. So this whole cascade is blocked, and because of this sodium ion cannot enter, and because of this sodium ion is excreted out in the urine, and thereby there is natriuresis. And apart from it, because of this process, potassium ions are conserved, and because of this there will be potassium sparing effect, and ultimately there is hyperkalemia. Whenever spironolactone is given, urinary excretion of potassium ion, calcium ion and magnesium ions are decreased. And on chronic use, it is found that spironolactone produces hyperuricemia. It also acts on androgen and progesterone receptors. Basically, it is acting on mineralocorticoid receptors, that is steroid receptors. Thereby, it also has got some effect on androgen receptor and progesterone receptor. And because of effect on these androgen receptors and progesterone receptors, there are certain side effects, as well as there are certain therapeutic uses which are utilized based on action on androgen and progesterone receptors. As such, spironolactone is never used as a diuretic alone. It is always used in combination with either thiazide diuretic or loop diuretics. Basically to increase their effectiveness, as well as to counteract hypokalemic effect that is produced by this loop diuretic or thiazide type diuretic. So it is very, very useful whenever it is combined with thiazide or furosemide type of diuretic. If we see pharmacokinetic, spironolactone is given as orally microfine powder tab. And it is found that food increases absorption of spironolactone. So it is always better to give spironolactone after meals or along with meals. Bioavailability of spironolactone is around 75% with high plasma protein binding. And on metabolism, it is converted to active metabolite canrenone, which is longer acting. In case of classification, you have already seen that canrenone is one of the aldosterone antagonists. So, canrenone itself is used as a diuretic, and spironolactone's active metabolite is canrenone. And because of production of this active metabolite, effect of spironolactone is longer. T-half of spironolactone is only 8 hours, while that of canrenone is 17 hours. And because of this active metabolite canrenone, overall spironolactone's duration of action is long, so it can be given once a day doses. If we see uses of spironolactone, it is used in case of generalized edema, especially in case of cirrhotic edema and nephrotic syndrome. Whenever there is diuretic resistance to thiazide or furosemide, in case of refractory edema, whenever spironolactone is added, it breaks down this refractoriness to thiazide and furosemide. And in case of this generalized edema, spironolactone is found to be useful in combination with thiazide or furosemide. One of the purpose to combine spironolactone with thiazide or furosemide is to counteract potassium loss. This thiazide and furosemide will prompt potassium loss in urine, while if spironolactone is added, it will try to conserve potassium ion so that potassium balance can be maintained, and because of this cardiac side effects can be prevented. As such, in case of hypertension, it is combined with thiazide. Whenever it is found that thiazide diuretics are not sufficient enough as a monotherapy in case of essential hypertension, then spironolactone is added with thiazide diuretic. In case of congestive heart failure, it is used as an adjunctive therapy. Basically, it retards disease progression, as well as on long-term use, it is found that spironolactone reduces mortality in congestive heart failure patient. Then, because of anti-androgenic action, it can also be used in case of polycystic ovary disease as well as hirsutism. Then, it is used in case of primary aldosteronism, that is also known as Conn syndrome. So, whenever there is excessive aldosterone, then spironolactone can be added. As you know that spironolactone is aldosterone antagonist. Then in case of refractory edema due to secondary hyperaldosteronism, spironolactone is useful. If you see adverse effect of spironolactone, one of the common adverse effect of spironolactone is hyperkalemia risk, especially in case of chronic renal failure patient. So you should be cautious whenever you are prescribing spironolactone in chronic renal failure patients. Whenever patients are on angiotensin converting inhibitors or angiotensin receptor blockers, whenever patient has been prescribed potassium supplements, in these conditions there are higher chances of hyperkalemia, and there are higher chances that patient might develop cardiac arrhythmias. So before prescribing spironolactone, always make sure that your patient kidney function is optimum. Patient is not on ACE inhibitors or angiotensin receptor blocker, or he or she is not prescribed potassium supplements. In case of steroids, depending on steroid structure, as you know, spironolactone is also acting on androgenic receptors and progesterone receptors. So in case of males, there are chances of gynecomastia, impotence in males, as well as loss of libido in case of males, while in case of females, hirsutism and menstrual irregularities can be found because of spironolactone. Then drowsiness and abdominal upset, these are some miscellaneous adverse effects. If we see drug interactions of spironolactone, it may increase digoxin levels in case of congestive heart failure. Digoxin is one of the leading drug which is prescribed in case of congestive heart failure, and because of interaction between spironolactone and digoxin, there are higher chances that digoxin level increases. Digoxin is one of the drug which is having very low therapeutic index, and because of this you will have to maintain digoxin level in therapeutic range, above which there will be toxicities, while below which there are subtherapeutic effects. So here as spironolactone is increasing digoxin level, and because of this there are chances of digoxin toxicity. So whenever you are prescribing spironolactone in case of congestive heart failure patient, make sure you are monitoring digoxin properly. In case of NSAIDs, especially aspirin, decreases its effects by acting through prostaglandins. So all the NSAIDs decreases effect of spironolactone, so you might not get desirable diuretic effect. Second diuretic in this class is eplerenone. It's more selective aldosterone antagonist, and it has got less effect on androgenic and progesterone receptor, and because of this there is less hormonal adverse effect in comparison to spironolactone. Hyperkalemia risk is similar to spironolactone, so efficacy wise it is similar to spironolactone. If we see uses of eplerenone, it can be useful in case of moderate to severe congestive heart failure patients along with thiazide or furosemide. Then it is also useful in case of post-myocardial infarction, left ventricular failure. In these cases, eplerenone is useful. And recently in Joint National Commission for Hypertension Guideline 8, it is found that eplerenone is fourth drug in case of resistant hypertension. Resistant hypertension is the hypertension in which there is even after prescribing 3 first-line drugs, ACE inhibitors or ARBs, then calcium channel blockers, and beta blockers, even after and diuretics, even after prescribing these 3 group of drug, blood pressure is not controlled. Then as a fourth drug, you can add eplerenone. Next is amiloride and triamterene. These are the directly acting sodium channel blockers. They directly inhibit pumps in distal tubules and collecting ducts. Therefore, they are independent of aldosterone. Amiloride is very sensitive on renal epithelial sodium channels, which are blocked. It has got weak diuretic action, and because of this, it is never used alone. Indirectly, it also inhibits potassium secretions, and thereby it also inhibits hydrogen ion secretions. Amiloride, whenever it is given in aerosol form, there are higher chances of cystic fibrosis. Other ADRs relatively fewer than spironolactone, as it is not acting on mineralocorticoid receptor or androgenic receptor or progesterone receptor, and because of this, it does not cause sexual dysfunction. This is the graphical representation of mechanism of action of amiloride and triamterene. Basically, they inhibit this epithelial sodium channel, and thereby it do not allow sodium to enter into lumen, and thereby there is sodium natriuresis occur, and because of this there is diuresis. Apart from it, it also conserves potassium ions, and thereby it acts as potassium sparing diuretic. If we see onset of action, in comparison to spironolactone, onset of action is much faster, and it reduces loss of potassium in urine, and because of this conservation, there is predisposition to acidosis, and there is hyperkalemia with potassium supplements, ARBs and ACE inhibitors, same as spironolactone. Amiloride is 10 times more potent than triamterene and used along with thiazide to prevent hypokalemia. If we see clinical status of this triamterene and amiloride, they are used as potassium sparing diuretics, especially in case of essential hypertension, cystic fibrosis. Then they are also useful in case of lithium-induced nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, Liddle syndrome, that is low renin and increased volume hypertension. Here volume, extracellular fluid volume is increased, and because of this, whenever this triamterene or amiloride is prescribed, they tend to decrease the volume, and thereby they are useful to control blood pressure, and they are also useful in case of pseudoaldosteronism. If we see adverse effect of this triamterene and amiloride, as they are potassium sparing diuretic, hyperkalemia is most prominent, followed by hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis because of conservation of potassium ions, then headache, nausea, vomiting and diarrheas, then dizziness, muscle cramps, photosensitivity, renal stones, and as common with all diuretic, there is a impaired glucose tolerance, as well as there are chances of formation of interstitial nephritis. So these are some adverse effects of triamterene and amiloride. There are certain precautions and contraindications of triamterene and amiloride. Hyperkalemia can occur if potassium supplements are given, so make sure your patient is not taking potassium supplements. It should be avoided whenever potassium level may be increased. For example, whenever renal dysfunction or renal failure is there, in those cases chances of potassium ions are higher. Then whenever your patient is on AC inhibitors or beta blockers or ARBs, in those cases chances of hyperkalemia may be more. And do not combine two potassium sparing diuretics. You cannot combine spironolactone with amiloride or triamterene. Whenever two potassium sparing diuretics are combined, there are higher chances of hyperkalemia. Dose reduction is needed whenever renal failure or in case of hepatic impairment. And you should avoid spironolactone in case of peptic ulcer and gastritis. And NSAIDs may inhibit action of spironolactone and triamterene. So that is potassium sparing diuretic. Basically, these potassium sparing diuretics are mild diuretic. They try to conserve potassium ions. So whenever there are chances of hypokalemia, these potassium sparing diuretics are combined with other diuretic like thiazide diuretic or loop diuretic, so that hypokalemia do not occur. And you should avoid this potassium sparing diuretic whenever there are chances of hyperkalemia or higher level of potassium ions, such as renal impairment, or your patient is on ARBs or ACE inhibitors or beta blockers, or your patient is prescribed potassium supplementation. Make sure you avoid potassium sparing diuretic in these conditions. Next is carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. Carbonic anhydrase is the enzyme which is inhibited by acetazolamide, methazolamide, brinzolamide, dorzolamide. These are some agents which belongs to this class of diuretic. It is present in kidneys as well as in CNS, eyes, gastric mucosa, pancreas and RBCs. Basically, these carbonic anhydrase inhibitors are less potent in comparison to loop diuretic or thiazide type of diuretic. If we see mechanism of action, in proximal tubule, carbonic anhydrase helps in reabsorption of bicarbonate as sodium bicarbonate by causing ionization of H2CO3. It catalyzes the formation of carbonic acid which spontaneously ionizes to hydrogen ion and bicarbonate ion. This bicarbonate ion combines with sodium and is reabsorbed. Carbonic anhydrase inhibitor inhibit this carbonic anhydrase enzyme in a non-competitive but reversible manner, and they reduce the availability of hydrogen ion and bicarbonate hydrogen ion in proximal convoluted tubule to be exchanged with sodium, and thereby, as the hydrogen ion are not exchanged with sodium, there is natriuresis and ultimately diuresis. If we see actions of carbonic anhydrase inhibitor, there will be complete inhibition of bicarbonate reabsorption, and because of this, acetazolamide also inhibits secretions of acid at collecting duct. There is a reduction in renal blood flow, and because of reduction in renal blood flow, GFR is also reduced. As carbonic anhydrase inhibitors inhibit bicarbonate reabsorption, all this bicarbonate is excreted out, and because of this bicarbonate excretion, there is inhibition of ammonia and acids, and because of this, urine become more alkaline. And because of this, as these acids and ammonia are not excreted out, there will be metabolic acidosis. Apart from kidney, as you know that carbonic anhydrase is also present in CNS, and because of this direct CNS action and acidosis, seizure threshold is raised. So seizure threshold is raised, so patient will become less susceptible to develop seizure. Then because of CNS action, it reduces formation of CSF, and because of this there might be chances of sedation as well as paresthesia. It reduces formation of aqueous humor in eye, and because of this it reduces intraocular tension. This action can be utilized in case of glaucoma, in which our aim is to reduce the intraocular tension to prevent optic nerve damage. So nowadays dorzolamide and rizolamide are one of the leading drugs in treatment of glaucoma. And it also reduces amount of CO2 in expired air, and because of this there is increased level of CO2 in peripheral tissues. If you see pharmacokinetic, acetazolamide is well absorbed orally with nearly 100% bioavailability. So this is one of the few drugs which are having very high bioavailability by oral route. It has got very high concentration in tissues which are rich in carbonic anhydrase. Onset of action is within 60 to 90 minutes, and duration of action is around 8 to 12 hours. And it is excreted unchanged by kidney. If you see adverse effect, because of loss of bicarbonate ion, there is hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis. Then as it do not allow excretion of ammonia, and because of this there is accumulation of ammonia in the body, and because of this, as liver is not able to clear this ammonia, there are chances of hepatic encephalopathy, then hematuria, photosensitivity, and because of hematuria there is melena. If we see uses of carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, they are adjunct drugs in the long-term management of open-angle glaucoma. In case of open-angle glaucoma, they are one of the leading drugs. Then, as you have seen that one of the effect of carbonic anhydrase inhibitor is alkalinization of urine, because they are not allowing acids to excreted out in the urine. So whenever, because of some reason you need to alkalinize the urine, carbonic anhydrase inhibitors are given. This uric acid and cysteine excretion can be enhanced by bicarbonate, and it is more soluble in alkaline urine. Then it also produces metabolic alkalosis. It can be useful in case of metabolic alkalosis because it is producing acidic environment in the body. So whenever alkalosis due to excess diuretics in patients with heart failure, this patient responds better to acetazolamide. Then they are also useful whenever hyperphosphatemia is there, so that they help to remove phosphate ions. Then they are also useful as they are reducing intraocular tension. They are used with miotics to lower intraocular pressure before ocular surgery in certain cases. They are also useful in treatment of generalized edema along with other diuretics. Then they are useful as a prophylaxis of epilepsy, and they are also useful in case of high altitude sickness. So these are the uses of acetazolamide and other carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. Next class of drug is osmotic diuretics. As the name suggests, they are acting through osmotic pressures. In case of osmotic diuretic, we have got mannitol and urea that can be used by intravenous infusion, as well as we have got glycerin and isosorbate that can be given orally. So basically they act by increasing osmotic pressure. They are freely filtered, but their absorption is limited by renal tubules, and thereby they act as osmotic diuretic. Pharmacologically, they are inert substances, but they are active osmotically. So basically, they are not binding with any type of receptor in the body, but they osmotically act, and thereby they are producing osmotic diuresis. They increases osmolality of plasma and tubular fluid. And diuresis produced by this osmotic diuretics has a negligible amount of sodium ions. So there is little or no natriuresis, and only excessive water loss is there because of osmotic diuretic. This is the figure showing mechanism of action of osmotic diuretic. As you can see over here that this mannitol osmotically attracts H2O ions and nothing else. There is no effect on any other ions, and because of this there is excessive water loss in urine and diuresis is produced. Because of excessive water loss, there is a loss of water, and there is a reduced intracellular volume, and there is little or no natriuresis is there. There are chances of hypernatremia risk because of mannitol or other osmotic diuretics. Primary site of action is descending loop and also proximal convoluted tubule. Agents which increases osmotic pressure are not reabsorb retained water, leading to water diuresis. And because of this, they antagonize the action of vasopressin in collecting tubule. If we see action of osmotic diuretic, they prevent normal absorption of water due to osmotic action. Because of this excessive water loss, there is a decreased renin release, and they shift fluid from intracellular side to extracellular side. So basically intracellular fluid volume is decreased, and there is increase in extracellular fluid volume, and because of this it reduces blood viscosity. Urinary excretion of all electrolytes along with water increases, and renal blood flow also increases. If we see pharmacokinetic, mannitol and urea which are given by IV infusion, while glycerin and isosorbate they are given orally. T-half of glycerin and mannitol is around 30 minutes to 2 hours, while isosorbate acts for 5 to 10 hours. Urea, it is unknown. Glycerin is also 80% metabolized, while other agents are excreted unchanged. Clinical status of osmotic diuretics: they are used to reduce intraocular tension, especially in case of glaucoma patient. There are two types of glaucoma: open angle glaucoma and narrow angle glaucoma. Acute attack of narrow angle glaucoma is one of the emergencies. If not treated promptly, then there are chances of permanent damage to optic nerve. So in case of attack of narrow angle glaucoma, mannitol is the first drug which is given, so that thereby it reduces intraocular tension by osmotic action. It also reduces intracranial tension. So whenever a head injury patients are there, or somehow you want to reduce the intracranial tension, osmotic diuretics are the drugs which can reduce intracranial tension. Then there increases renal blood flow, and because of this as well as increasing renal blood flow, as well as they do not have bind with any other of the receptors or on renal epithelium. They just produces diuresis by osmotic action. So in case of acute renal failure, osmotic diuretics are the drug to go or diuretic to go, as kidney function, proper kidney function is not required for diuretic action of osmotic diuretics. So in case of acute renal failure, osmotic diuretics are prescribed. Then they are also used to maintain urine volume and prevent oliguria in conditions like massive hemolysis, rhabdomyolysis, shock, and severe trauma. In such situations, mannitol prevents renal failure. In massive hemolysis, rhabdomyolysis, shock, and severe trauma, there are chances that your patient might go into acute renal failure. So basically, by maintaining urine volume, mannitol prevent your patient to go into renal failure, and thereby it reduces the complications of this comorbid conditions. You see adverse effect: headache, nausea, and vomiting due to hyponatremia. Then pulmonary edema in case of patients of heart failure, that is because of shifting of blood from intracellular fluids to extracellular sites. Then whenever IV osmotic drugs are given, because of extravasation, there is pain at injection site, and as they are producing osmotic diuresis, there are chances of severe dehydration. And in case of glycerin, it is found that it produces hyperglycemia. There are certain precautions and contraindications of osmotic diuretics. In case of heart failure and anemia patient due to severe renal disease, they should not be used. Then in case of poor hepatic function patient, because of accumulation of anemia, your patient might develop encephalopathy. So you should be cautious while prescribing osmotic diuretic in patients with poor hepatic function. Then in case of active cranial bleeding, urea and mannitol should be avoided. So that is osmotic diuretics. So in summary of this diuretic group of drugs, you should not use diuretics over enthusiastically, otherwise you might produce electrolyte imbalance as well as dehydration, and because of this there might be chances of hypotension. Then brisk diuresis in cirrhosis may precipitate hepatic coma because of accumulation of ammonia. Other reasons are hypokalemia, alkalosis, and increased ammonia level. Then diuretics should not be used in case of proxemia of pregnancy because blood volume is already low because of edema, and diuretic will compromise placental circulation. So in case of proxemia of pregnancy, diuretics should be avoided. Then most loop diuretics and thiazide diuretics are sulfonamide derivatives. So sulfonamides are one of the agents which are having some allergic potential. So think of allergic manifestation whenever you are prescribing thiazide diuretics or loop diuretics. Hypokalemia by diuretic precipitate digitalis and quinidine side effects in form of cardiac arrhythmias. So whenever you are prescribing diuretics with digitalis or quinidine, be cautious. Then hypokalemia by diuretic decreases sulfonylurea action, that is one of the leading anti-diabetic drug. It reduces insulin release due to reduced action of ATP dependent potassium channel. Then high ceiling diuretics not given with aminoglycosides because of chances of phototoxicity and nephrotoxicity. ACE inhibitors or ARB, whenever combined with thiazide, they reduces the chances of hypokalemia, and many times these ACE inhibitors and ARBs are available as fixed dose combination with thiazides. And probenecid inhibits tubular secretion of furosemide and thiazide and reduces its action. Then potency of producing hypokalemia is more in case of carbonic anhydrase inhibitor in comparison to thiazide and loop diuretic. All the NSAIDs reduces diuretic action due to prostaglandin inhibition and affecting glomerular blood flow. Acetazolamide action is self-limiting. Spironolactone breaks the thiazide resistance. So whenever you come across that your patient is not responding to thiazide or loop diuretic, add spironolactone so to break the thiazide resistance. Then aspirin blocks spironolactone action by inhibiting tubular secretion of candrinone. Spironolactone can produce dangerous hyperkalemia whenever they are combined with ACE inhibitors or ARBs. ACE inhibitors and ARBs are combined with thiazide diuretics so that hypokalemia can be compensated. On other spectrum, spironolactone, if combined with ACE inhibitors or ARB, that can produce severe hyperkalemia. Spironolactone has got some anti-androgenic side effects, so make sure or inform your male patients about this anti-androgenic side effects like loss of libido, impotence and gynecomastia, or in case of female patient like menstrual irregularity. Eplerenone is new potassium sparing diuretic with less anti-androgenic effect, while osmotic diuretics are indicated in case of impending acute renal failure patients. So wherever no other diuretic are useful, osmotic diuretic can be useful in case of acute renal failure. Thank you.